This parable comes on the heels of Jesus entering the gates of Jerusalem for the triumphal entry. This is where Jesus spends most of his time talking about heaven and preparing people for that unexpected hour. Now, there was a young man, a rich young man, who came to Jesus wanting to be one of his disciples. What must I do? I have followed all of the commandments. I have followed the law of the letter, right down to the very last dot. And Jesus says, sell all of your possessions and follow me. Now the young man had hung his head sorrowfully and laughed because he owned great wealth. And the disciples were just blown away by this because, so you have to realize the stature of people back then. If you owned a lot of money, if you were really high-ranking, if you had an official title, you were considered above everyone else and more worthy for everything than the rest of the people. And they figured to themselves, if this young man who has followed the letter of the law and owns all of this wealth, if he can't get into heaven, then who can? The last shall be first. The first shall be last. So then Jesus goes on to tell this parable of the vineyard owner. He comes to town, to the marketplace, and he gathers all those people who were the early birds. They were the ones who were up early, right away in the morning. They were going out to earn money for their family, to get food and to pay for their supplies. And they were ready to work. We all know those people. And he agreed from the very beginning, if you work for me, I will pay you a full day's wage, which is 1 denarius. Well, that was fine with them. That was fair. I work all day. I get paid a day's wage. That sounds awesome. So they headed off to work. The vineyard owner looks around. He sees there's still a lot of work yet to be done. And so he comes back into the city. And he looks for more people standing there. And he says, you come with me and I will pay you what is right. Now you notice he did not say, I will pay you 1 denarius. He says, I will pay you what is right, what is just, what is fair in his eyes. So they load up and they come out and they work. He goes back several times later through the day and he continues to pick up more people. And he says the same thing, I will pay you what is right, what is just, and what is fair. Then he goes out, this is the 11th hour, which would be the last hour. I guess they work 12-hour days. And he found a few people. Now, we don't know why they showed up at the last hour. Immediately, I'm sure you've had those people pop into your head, the surfing hay dudes, not to stereotype there, but the laid-back people who just, they don't run on any kind of a clock system. They just come and go, and, I just couldn't get around any sooner, and I show up at the last minute. But we don't stop to think that maybe one of those people was another hard-working father who, because of some circumstance or some emergency, anything could happen, he couldn't get there right away in the morning. And yet he was so desperate to still be able to provide for his family that he gambles on a chance that somebody might hire him. And he shows up at that last minute. Well, it says the vineyard owner takes it too, and he says, I'll pay you what is right and what is just. Now they're probably figuring, hey, if I just get a handful of grapes to eat, that would be fair. It's better than standing on the street corner. So after they're done working, the vineyard owner does something totally unexpected. Now you would have thought, as we talked about with the children's sermon, that he would have paid the first people first. They had been out working and toiling under the heat and the sun all day long, and I'm sure all they were thinking about is, I want to get home, I want to get to my family, I want to just rest. And now all of a sudden, they have to wait. They've been told, nope, we're going to start with the last ones first, and that's how they're going to get paid. So he starts at the last ones. And as they come up, expecting maybe a handful of grapes or a loaf of bread, the vineyard owner has his employee pay them each a denarius. Can you imagine what was going through their minds? What would be going through your minds? If you had showed up at the last hour, whatever circumstances, and you'd only worked 1 hour, whether you gave it your all that hour or you just kind of goofed around because it was almost the end of the day, what would your reaction be if you got paid an entire day's wage? Would it be one of gratitude? I got the, yes! That's right. That's probably what you'd be thinking, right? This is pretty cool. How about, man, I wonder if I would have showed up at the beginning what I would have gotten. Because you never set on a price, did you? Huh. So now the people who are next in line, who work 3 hours or 5 hours, they're sitting there going, wow, I got a whole denarius just for working an hour. I wonder what I'm going to get. And the next group comes up, and he pays them all a denarius. They're going, well, you know, okay, but I guess I can't be mad because I got paid a whole day's wage and only had to work a half a day. So they're still feeling pretty good. Then you get all the way down to the people who were there at crack of dawn, who had slaved all day long. What do you think's going through their head? Yeah, I wonder what I'm going to get. If this landowner is so generous that he is willing to give somebody who only worked an hour a whole day's wage, and people who worked half a day a whole day's wage, what do you think I'm going to get paid? Woohoo! I could go on a vacation. I might be able to afford that new donkey. So what do you think was their reaction when the landowner placed a denarius in their hand? Yeah, it says they weren't happy. It says they were mad. They were complaining. They were grumbling. They were upset. What did the landowner say? He says, what do you mean that's not fair? Did we not agree on 1 denarius at the beginning of the day? And they go, well, yeah. And I paid you 1 denarius. Now, see, isn't it like we talked about at the children's sermon? Isn't it a matter of perception? If he had paid those first workers first, they would have gone, woo! I got a denarius for a full day's worth of wage. I am excited. I am excited. I got exactly what I agreed upon. This man is fair. And they would have gone home and they'd been tickled to death. But because they got paid last, and they saw what the other ones got for less work, all of a sudden now they're not happy. If you're sitting there scratching your head a little bit, you're not the only ones. Because that's exactly what the disciples were doing. This doesn't make sense. That so does not make sense. That's not fair. But then Jesus goes on to explain that the vineyard owner is God. That this isn't about earthly work and wage, but about eternal life and grace and salvation. We don't work for it. It's His to give freely. Well, I want to take this another little spin. Because while I said now, it may seem unfair, actually, there again, it's all in perception. If we're talking about working for the kingdom of God, if we're talking about being those workers who showed up early on, ever since we were little, and we've worked our entire life in God's ministry, and we get salvation, is that unfair for those who did not work, who stood idly by in the marketplace their whole life, twiddling their thumbs, waiting and waiting with nothing to do? Think about it. When you've been in church your whole life, was it horrible or was it fun? Was it rewarding being in God's ministry, working together, being in fellowship, doing exciting things like this bazaar today, being a part of all the Easters and all the Christmases and all the plays and the pageants and the picnics, the Sunday school and the Bible school, doing the outward ministry? Is that not more reward than standing on the street corner alone, twiddling your thumbs for years, wondering when your time's going to be picked? See, that's the thing. Unlike the vineyard owner and Christ, we're not picked. We're all picked. We just have to be willing to accept. I love the parables that Jesus uses because there's so many different perceptions of how we can look at things. And that's exactly where the disciples were. They were grumbling of who would be first and who would be last. Because Peter immediately jumps in and says, but what about us? He's talking about the rich young ruler. He says, we have given up everything. Our possessions, our families, to follow you. What will we get? Can you imagine this? After 3 years of being with Jesus, 3 years of being his disciples, and they're going, what's in it for me then? If this rich guy can't get into heaven very easily, then how are we going to stand a chance? See how he immediately reverted back to earthly means. And Jesus, it's there that he tells them of the 2 rewards. He said, because of what you've given up here on earth, you will be rewarded 100-fold. And you are already rewarded with salvation. See, that's the second reward. And that's what I was getting at with those who've been working in God's service their whole life. There's 2 rewards. There's the earthly reward of 100-fold of being in ministry with him. And then there's the reward of salvation. So those who come in at that last hour, that last moment, they get the reward of salvation. They don't get the reward of the 100-fold here on earth. Perception. Expect the unexpected. And that's what God is full of, all the unexpected things that he's going to pop in your path as you're doing ministry. All the little joys, all the little smiles, all the little lives that you're going to touch while you're serving him. So my challenge for you is this next week, as we fight through the world's what's fair and what's not fair and what's right and what's not right, maybe you start looking at things a little differently, from a little different perspective, and go, how can I use this as a ministry tool? And how can I feel the rewards while I'm here?